I've never made a mistake, right?
Hello, this is Cynthia Dyer, and I'm here with Sergeant First Class Christian Williams, and we are filming for the Library of Congress's Veteran History Project today. And so, Christian, if you would please state your name, full name, spell it for the record, and we'll start from there. Go ahead.
All right. My name is Christian R. Williams, ChristianRWilliams. I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, way back in 1945. I'm a war baby, obviously. Um, my biological father was in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was raised, my parents got a divorce when I was 6, so I was raised most of my life in a single parent home. But we had a big influence by the Salvation Army. We attended the church. I got to work in the Salvation Army camps in the summertime. And that's where I kind of got the military structure idea in my life, because in the Salvation Army they have officer ranks, uh, just like the
That's
military.
True. Yes.
And I kind of liked it. It was good structure. I so we if it wasn't for the Salvation Army, my family and I would have had a really tough time. But they really helped. That's my favorite charity.
That's awesome.
That my wife and I both contribute to on a regular basis. However, um, when I graduated from school, or when I was a child, we grew up, like I said, in Omaha. Uh, I really had no real interest in the military other than listening to my uncles tell their war stories. All my family before I were in the Navy. My biological father, and many years later, when my mother remarried, my stepfather was in Navy. All of my uncles were Navy. But as I grew up and graduated from school, um, my we had a good family that lived down the street from us, and there was three of us: a kid named Norman, a kid named Wayne, and I. We were inseparable. But Norman's mother worked at the draft board. She called my mom one day, and this was in like 1960, 65, late 65, early 66.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And this lady told my mother, she said, Dorothy, Chris's number's coming up. That's when they had the draft. This was during Vietnam, like I said. So my mom, of course, told me. And I talked to a bunch of friends of mine. Most of them, or some of them, were military vets. And they said, oh, Chris, join. Don't get drafted. Join. I said, well, why? I said, you get your choice. So I got my choice. I decided, yes, let me go ahead and join up.
And what branch did you join?
I joined the Army. And the reason I joined the Army was, if I joined the Navy, I'd had to serve 4 years. If I'd have joined the Air Force, another 4 years. Well, the Army, if you joined in the Army at that time, you only had to serve 3 years. I had no plan of staying in the military whatsoever. But it really helped me. Because when I went in the military, I was 20 years old. I thought I had the world by the tail, man. Nobody could tell me anything. I was the smartest thing since sliced bread. But it really woke me up. It made me a man. It broke me down to nothing and built me right back up. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me, personally. Um, my personal opinion is, I think every person in the United States should serve their country in some form or another for at least 1 year. At least 1 year. That's just mine. Now, they do it in Switzerland. They do it in Italy. I know for a fact they do it in Israel. Most of the countries in the world force everyone to serve their country in some form or another for at least a year. I think that's a great idea. But I'm not a politician, and I'm definitely not the president. So anyway, I did
So-
enjoy my military
So
career.
you chose the Army to enlist in the Army.
I did. I enlisted in the Army for 3 years, and I decided I wanted to be a clerk. because I've always liked being organized to a point, and I figured, well, I can type papers. I can do that pretty cool. Well, I did, and I was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, for my basic training. Now, when I got there, they had looked at my test and they gave me an opportunity to spend an extra 2 weeks. And I don't know who in their right mind would want to spend an extra 2 weeks in basic training, but I did. And the reason I did is they sent me to a class. It was 2 weeks called Platoon Leader Development course, which gave me many opportunities while I was in a private first class, I mean, a private in the Army in basic training. I was an acting platoon leader. I wore staff sergeant stripes. I was just pretty cool. I was a fake sergeant. But I did have responsibilities. I had to draft up guard rosters, fire guard rosters, and make sure these people followed the orders and did what they were supposed to. And it started giving me the idea that, I kind of liked this being the leader stuff. So I did spend the extra 2 weeks at Fort Leonard Wood, and then I went through basic training. And right after basic training, I was again assigned to Fort Leonard Wood to go to my AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training, to become a real clerk. Went through all of that. That was quite cool. And Lord behold, I still got to stay at Fort Leonard Wood. I was assigned to a training company as the company clerk. My main responsibility was the morning report, which I don't know who's all familiar with that, but that's the paperwork that attracts every single person in the entire in the entire company. But it was a good job, and I liked it. And then, not too long after I was there, maybe a year, I got orders to go overseas, and I was really excited, but I didn't know where I was going. I got assigned to Lodges Field Air Force Base, Azores, Portugal.
Wow.
Now that's kind of a weird place to go because the Army, the Air Force, and the U.S. Navy are all stationed at Lodges Field. It's the third largest island in the Azorean chain. It's called Terceira.
It sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was in the Army there. Of course, now the Army had the port facilities. We ran everything that came in through the port through ships, which is really ironic because that's kind of the Navy's job. But we did it. We had, I don't know if you knew it at the time, but the Army had more watercraft than the Navy and more aircraft than the Air Force during the Vietnam War, or Vietnam era. Helicopters are aircraft, and tugboats are watercraft. But anyway, that's just kind of a side note that I kind of like to brag to my other service members. Yeah, we had more posts than you did. But anyway, to make a long story short, I enjoyed being in the Azores.
And you were a clerk there?
I was a clerk, and every bit of paperwork went through me. I mean, literally from promotions to demotions, discharges, whatever, everything went through my office and me, and I was in charge of the office. I made E5 in 19 months from the day I went into the Army, which is really rather quick.
Wow.
But while I was in the Azores, I found out that I had kind of a knack for picking up on languages. So I became, I won't really say totally fluent in Portuguese, but I could read the newspaper, I could converse with the locals, and I found that I had a knack to pick up languages, which will come into play much later in this little story here. Because I didn't stay in the barracks. I went out on the economy, I ate what they ate, I enjoyed their sports, what they did. I loved my job because I felt kind of important. I had 3 or 4 clerks that worked under me, and I had a direct line right to the commander. We were on a first name basis. He called me Williams, and I called him Sir. So kind of a first name thing, The truth is, as long as I was in the military as an NCO, I always knew my place. But it was always good. I enjoyed it. From the Azores, I was then assigned to to Vicenza, Italy, still as a clerk. Yeah, I loved it. It was, I mean, I got these choice assignments.
Exactly.
I was in charge of officer records as a personnel specialist. And that's about the time that the Army came down with, oh, we're going to promote everybody on a numbers basis. Well, as a clerk, clerks are dime a dozen, and the number was really, really high. And there was just no way that didn't think I could ever get promoted to E6. So my company commander was a pilot,
Mhm.
and I went to talk to him one day, and he said, Williams, I think you got two choices. And I said, well, what are they, sir? He said, you can be a surveyor, that has really great potential for promotion, or an air traffic controller. Well, to me, to be quite honest, it was a no-brainer. I mean, surveyors have to be outside in the cold and the wet and hot. I don't think so. I'm kind of lazy, not really, but I chose air traffic control. Number one, it was the longest school at that time in the U.S. Army. It was an 11-month school, and well, what the hey. But then so I had to take the test. I passed the test with no problems. Then I was assigned. I went from Vicenza, Italy, to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which was the headquarters for the Army Air Traffic Control School, along with the Warrant Officer School for Warrant Officer helicopter pilots. Well, I went into this school, and of course, being an E5 into a secondary school, of course, I was the ranking man, which means I had a lot more responsibilities than some of my peers. Um, I had to lead by example, demeanor, dress, and especially grades. It was expected that I was the E5. I was going to max out every course, every class. Well, actually, I did. And so I graduated number one in my class. And then I was really fortunate because I got to stay at Fort Rucker as an instructor. They said, well, Williams, you did a pretty good job. We'll just keep you here. So they kept me for, a couple more, a little bit more time. And then I really wanted to use the schooling that I had gotten. So I asked if I could maybe get assigned to a facility somewhere where I could actually control traffic. Well, we had a place in Fort Rucker, of course. It was Hub Control. That was the main facility to control all the aircraft that flew in the Fort Rucker area. And speaking of that, this was during, like I say, the Vietnam era. Fort Rucker logged more aircraft movements every single day than Chicago O'Hare International Airport.
Wow.
But every time an aircraft takes off and lands, it's a movement. So, it was really a busy place. There's a bunch of little small airfields dotted all in the area of Dothan and Fort Rucker, Alabama. And we controlled them all.
Wow.
And I was in the central hub where we did all this, which kind of reminds me of a really kind of a cool story. I had finally gotten rated, which means I could control traffic by myself. Up while you're rating, you have a controller over your shoulder watching everything you do. So I finally got to be rated and do it myself. Well, this was way back, and we could smoke, and I did. I don't now, but I did then. And I was sitting watching all these aircraft on this big radar scope, and there's all blips all over. And all of a sudden, I had a call that said, Hub Control, this is Army so-and-so and so-and-so. We're at such and such a place, and we're going down. So, well, what do I do now? Of course, I had been trained to do that. So the first thing out of my mouth was I yelled just about as loud as I could, mark the tapes, which means everything is taped.
Right.
And they mark the tapes on the spot, so if anything else happens, they know where to go back to. Well, immediately when an emergency is declared, even as a rated controller, the supervisor comes and stands over your shoulder and watches everything you do. Because what he's trying to do is he's trying to, in quote, get the picture. So every time I talked to an aircraft, I would point on the screen who I was talking to. And what I had to do was clear a path for this helicopter that was in trouble to go from here to here and get everybody out of his way. That was my job.
Yes.
Well, I ultimately did it, and I looked down, and we had those big brown ashtrays. It was full of lit cigarettes. I went through nearly a package of cigarettes and didn't even realize it. Didn't I had no idea. And so they said, "Okay, Williams, I've got it. You can get up now." Well, I started to get up. Miss Dyer, I couldn't stand up. My legs were rubber. I literally could not stand up. So what? We were on wheelchairs. We had chairs with wheels on them. My supervisor unplugged me, plugged himself in, and a couple of guys pulled me out and wheeled me to the break room. Which, by the way, as soon as something like that happens, you are isolated. They take an immediate blood test and a urine test on the spot to make sure the controller had no problem. And while we're talking about that, it was at the time where you could take no medication whatsoever while you were working control, while you were controlling traffic. You couldn't even take aspirin for a headache. If you had a headache, you either sucked it up or you went home. It was as simple as that. That also taught me something too. That you know what, learned to suck it up. And to this day, and you can ask anybody that knows me, I hate taking pills. And I have to sometimes, but I don't. If I got a headache, I just suck it up and move on if I can. But that's one of the things that my military experience has taught me. It just taught me to get tough, I guess. But anyway, that was kind of a weird story that I was in air traffic control when I was controlling traffic. It was my very first emergency. And it's really a scary feeling. But you know what? You're trained and you get through it with not a problem.
Yes.
So then after that, let me see what happened to me next. I was
You're still overseas.
no, I'm still in Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Fort Rucker now.
So not too long after all that, I was still, like I say, I went back to instructing for a while. And then I came down on orders for Germany, a little town called Schwäbisch Hall, Germany. Schwäbisch Hall was the headquarters for air traffic controllers in Europe, to include all of Germany. And that's where I went. I went to that facility. And now I had no tower experience at that time, so of course they assigned me to the control tower. Well, that was fine because it ultimately ended up that there's three phases of air traffic control. En route, which I was originally, that's where you see the radar and you take them from point A to point B. A tower, which everybody assumes is the air traffic control, because that's what everybody thinks about as air traffic control, is the guy in the tower. And there's also what they call GCA, which is ground controlled approach. That's the one where they say you're on glide slope, you're on path, and they talk them in. They can land them on a dime, literally. I ultimately ended up qualified in all three of those phases. Excuse me. But anyway, at this time I had no tower experience, so absolutely they sent me to the control tower. Well, I had to learn all over again, which was fine. I was always open to learn. Send me to a school, teach me anything you can teach me, which was a great opportunity while all the time I was in the military. I kept going to schools.
That's a great attitude.
Well,
so good.
it was free.
Yes, yes.
So I learned to become an air traffic controller from the control tower aspect, which is pretty cool because this is the first time I ever got to see the planes actually land, whether they're helicopters or fixed wing aircraft or jets or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And right across the airfield, while I was in Schwäbisch Hall, was a German airfield, German Air Club.
Mm.
And two little anecdotes that I got for that place was one, we got to every once in a while, the German pilots from across the everything would say, "Hey, anybody up in that tower want to go for an airplane ride?" Well, if we could be spared, sure, we'd just run downstairs, jump in that airplane, and go for a ride. It's great. I got to ride in an aircraft that was an exact duplicate of the Baron von Richthofen tri-wing. I can't remember the name of the aircraft. It's a big red one. It's beautiful. I got to ride in one of those. It was the coolest thing in the world. Open cockpit, goggles, the whole bit. It was really cool. It was a nice day too. That was even better. But then there's the other side of the story from that particular place. I'd like to tell you the story of the bravest man I ever heard. I was working control. I was working the tower one day, and we had nothing planned, and we had no flight strips. We had nothing scheduled to come in or go out. We were just kind of hanging around, telling war stories and lying to each other. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we heard the Schwäbisch Hall Tower. This is German Army. I don't remember the number. Let's say German Army 12345. We looked around. What's this? It was called a pop-up. We had no idea he was out there. So we answered the call. German Army 12345, this is Schwäbisch Hall Tower, go ahead. He said, this is German Army 12345. We're having a little bit of problem. We've got some severe vibrations in our helicopter. We're a UH-1, it's a Huey, and we'd like to come and land at your airfield and check it out. Well, of course, there are certain things that you have to do when somebody declares an emergency. You need to find out how many personnel on board, the fuel status, their location, their type of air. There's a bunch of things. It's a checklist. We went through that and said the man never did declare an emergency at this point. So we asked him. I said, "Sir, are you declaring an emergency?" "No, not yet. We'd like to come into your airport." And we knew where he was. So we picked up the glasses and we looked and we found him. He's a little tiny dot. So he continued inbound. We told him, "Come on in. We've got nothing going on. You're more than welcome to join us." So he came in and we could see the aircraft now. He's about 4 miles away. He's still coming in. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he said, "Schwäbisch Hall Tower, this is German Army 345. We just had rotor head separation, negative assistance required, out." What that means is he lost his blades. And a helicopter without the blades has the aerodynamic characteristics of a rock. It went right straight down, and we watched him. He fell and he hit the side of a steep hill, and he started rolling over and over and over. And of course, by this time, we've punched the buttons. We've got ambulance, we've got fire, we've got everything going on. We know exactly where this person is, where this aircraft is. We sent it out, and what happened is that aircraft rolled down this hill, nose over tail, and ended up there. It was small enough that they put it into the back of a 2.5-ton truck. They never got the bodies out. And to this day, I sometimes have nightmares about that, because that is the bravest man I ever heard. Negative assistance required. He was gone, and he knew it. That was just, like I said, that's the bravest man I ever heard in my life, and I will never forget that. So, moving on.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, it's very near and dear to my heart. I mean, it's something that you just never forget. After Schwäbisch Hall, they sent me down to a little town called Gerpingen, which is just a very tiny little airfield. It was the unique thing about Gerpingen Airfield. First of all, I was away from the flagpole. My headquarters was still Schwäbisch Hall, which was 70 miles away. And I had a detachment of myself and 10 other controllers. And I had to run this control tower 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, which was fine. I loved it because I was in charge. I liked it. Well, there's two cute stories from there too. One, it was never decided. Well, it was decided depending upon who the commanding general was, whether it was an airfield or a golf course. I know that's funny, but yeah. We had a golf course right in the middle of the airfield, and the runway split right down the middle of this little tiny 9-hole golf course. Just real flat, just really short, 3 holes, or three-stroke par 3 golf course. And these golfers would literally stand in the middle of the runway, looking up and watching aircraft coming in for landings. And we did everything we could to, listen, folks. I mean, there were signs everywhere. The aircraft have the right of way.
Right.
Well, some of those golfers just did not want those airplanes to play through. It's just as simple as that. And I finally ended up talking with the people who were in charge. I said, "You know what? Can I have a siren?" I wanted a siren so bad because I could ring the siren, and it would obviously get the attention of the golfers.
Certainly.
didn't help a whole lot. They still stood in the middle of the runway, but
Oh,
when they decided that the airplane really was going to land, they absolutely did.
hit the deck.
They got off they got off the runway. That was just one of them. But then there was one more time. It's kind of funny, but it's not. We had I had a big Chinook, which is a big, large helicopter. There was a sign there, and one of the pilots. It was just beginning of school, about this time of year. It was about the beginning of school time, and this pilot was taking the teachers, a whole bunch of teachers, out for an orientation ride of the area. So to kick them out and punching holes in the sky, let them see what was in the air. Well, again, it was just one of those days that just wasn't a whole lot going on. And we had one aircraft come in from another airfield, another facility, and he wanted to land at our airport, in which we said, sure, no problem, come on in. What happens is they had 4 people on board, plus the pilot, and they got off the airplane, off the helicopter, it was a Huey, and they all went down to the little PX. The next thing I know, they're loading beer and all kinds of stuff into this aircraft, which is fine. They probably were setting up for a party at their area, okay? Well, they kept putting more and more and more cargo in this aircraft. We didn't think too much of it. So the pilot says, yeah, we'd like to leave now. So we cleared him to depart, cleared, take off, go ahead and go back to your facility. 4 miles away from the airport was a checkout point that we had. It was called Castle Mountain. It was not a real mountain, but it was a very high hill. And so this helicopter took off, and he was heading up that way. And he said, oh, Swaybish Tower, this is Army whatever it was. He said, we're at Castle Mountain, and we're going down. I said, oh, Lord, here we go again. So I punched the button. But the whole thing is, I pulled a boo-boo. It was a Friday afternoon. It was clear, beautiful, wonderful, beautiful day. And about 3 o'clock, I released my people. You're not supposed to be in the control tower by yourself. Well, I'm not going to get in trouble now. It's been way too many years, but I was in that control tower by myself. And this happened. So I punched the button, and fortunately, there was a young second lieutenant in base operations that I called up, and I said, come over here, I need some help. So he came into the tower to help me. He was also a pilot, so he had a pretty good idea what was going on. He was going to be my right hand. I'll never forget him. His name was Curtis. That's his first name. So we're in this control tower, and at about this time, this big helicopter that had all these teachers on board was inbound. I said, I told the aircraft, I said, we had an aircraft go down at Castle Mountain, fly cover, which fly cover means fly over this area, see what's going on, see if anybody's hurt, see if there's a fire, see if you can help. And he said, okay. And I said, via direct, which means go exactly from where you are directly to this place. Well, it just so happened that his via direct took him his flight path right over the top of the commanding general's home. Now, a CH-47 is a large, double-bladed helicopter that makes a very lot of noise.
It was loud.
It's very loud, has a lot of vibrations. Well, to make a long story short, he did. He flew directly to Castle Mountain, right over the top of the commanding general's house at a low altitude. So he got up to the Castle Mountain and said, okay, we have no fire. The people seem to be okay. I'm coming back. So he did. Well, when they got out there was no sign whatsoever of any cargo in that aircraft. Believe it or not, it was all disappeared. But I know, and now you know that aircraft was overloaded with something, but it wasn't there when the investigators got there.
Right.
I have no idea what happened to it. And I do not care. But anyway, having said all that, I said, ooh. But during the meantime, the telephone rings, and Curtis answered the phone. Tower. He said, I'm sorry, he handed the phone to me, and I said, I don't know who this is, but I cannot talk to you right now. I have an emergency. Call back in an hour. And I hung up the phone.
It was the commanding general.
That happened twice. He called back, and I picked up the phone. I said, don't call back. I'll call you. Bye. And I was really rude. It was pretty bad. But I was in emergency.
Yes,
I
we're in
had
the midst of
a job.
emergency. Yes.
Well, he called back a third time and Curtis talked to him. He said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Yeah, and he said, Williams, that was the commanding general himself. I said, oops. Well, that was a Friday. I knew for a fact where I would be first thing Monday morning. I was going to be called into the commanding general's office. 2 stars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got my act together. Over the weekend, I got a haircut. I broke starch. I spit shined my boots. More strack I could not have been. I mean, I was the picture for a perfect soldier. I just knew where I was going. Bigger in Stuttgart. 10 o'clock. Bang, bang, bang. There's a knock on my office. In walks this captain. Sergeant Williams? Yes, sir. General so-and-so would like to see you. Yes, sir. Now. Okay. So we went over.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in and I reported. Sir, Sergeant Williams reports as ordered. He looked up at me and he said, are you the individual who hung up on me twice? Yes, sir, I am. What do you have to say for yourself? I said, sir, now I looked at his uniform. He didn't have wings. He was not a pilot.
Oh.
Okay. I said, sir, only thing I can tell you is I'd like to defend myself by saying, if you were on that aircraft, I was in the middle of an emergency. If you had been on that aircraft that was down, would you prefer to have help, if you needed help, come fly directly to you, or go around a general's house and waste more time? That's about all I can say, sir. I was doing my job. I apologize for being rude, but I thought that this had precedence over anybody I was talking to. To be quite honest, sir, I would have hung up the telephone on the President of the United States to save those people. He kind of looked back. He said, okay, don't do it again. Yes, sir, yes, sir. And I walked out the door. But I was strack. I had my uniform squared away. But that's just one of the things that it taught me how to think on my feet.
Yes.
And to come up with something that's going to save my sit-down place, as simple as that. But it was the truth. And that's exactly what I told the man. You know, I was
You
prepared.
can't argue with doing the right thing.
I
And
was
you
doing
did
my-
the right thing.
And I thought I did the right thing.
Yes.
And I did. And the commanding general, and of course, obviously I'm not using names, but he agreed with me.
Yes.
Sometimes you just got to suck it up and move on. But
Mhm.
then after after Gurpingen, I went back to Fort Rucker.
Can I ask you a question before
Certainly,
you leave
anytime.
there?
Ask anytime.
So did you learn German? I mean, you seem to have an ear for languages if you were picking up.
I learned enough German to get around. I could get fed.
Mhm.
I could find a place to sleep.
Okay.
I didn't speak it fluently,
Mhm.
but I found when you go to a foreign country, if you even attempt
Mhm.
to use their language, they respect that.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how many other people in this world speak English.
Mhm.
It's it's just one of those things that I found out if you try,
Right.
people respect that.
I agree. So anyway, so then you came back to the United States. Was that right?
Yes.
From
I
Germany.
came back from the United States, went back to Fort Rucker,
Okay.
and became an instructor again.
Oh.
I really liked that. I really enjoyed passing on what I knew to other controllers or other students. Then they came up with a program there. They took the air traffic control package
Mhm.
and sent it to different units in the United States, the National Guard and the Army Reserve units. And what I did was I coordinated that. I would know what unit. For example, we'll take San Antonio.
Mhm.
And that's, by the way, that's the reason I'm in Texas today. I came to San Antonio. They have an air reserve here in San Antonio. And what I did is I gleaned through all the instructors, and I knew what classes had to be taught.
Mhm.
And I would select the instructors to go to San Antonio for the weekend. It was a weekend duty. You left on Thursday afternoon.
Mhm.
You spent Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and came back Monday. That was a 5-day trip, and you would go to these different towns.
Mhm.
Well, I was nominated and selected by the FAA that I was the one who gave what they call the control tower operator test. It's the very first test you ever have to take in order to become an air traffic controller. You must pass this test,
Okay.
and only one person in each facility is allowed to do that. And I was selected by the FAA to do that. That's the reason I got to go on most of these trips, and I loved it.
Yes.
It was TDY all over the nation: Los Angeles, Boston, San Antonio, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Burlington, Vermont. Um, it was really a good job. I really enjoyed it because, again, the Army taught me how to lead,
Sure.
taught me how to select,
Mhm.
and the way I would do it is I would call up and I would say, Sergeant Smith, you're from Boston. How would you like to go home for a weekend? Yeah, I would. I said, on the Army's dime. Well, yeah, of course.
Mhm.
But here's the catch. You have to teach a class Saturday and Sunday. No problem. We would go to these different places, and I would always select people from that area as much as I could. Besides, that helped me and the other people that were with us to find out the local area. And a lot of times we were invited to mom and dad's house for dinner. There was
Mhm.
awesome, good free meals. But I really enjoyed that job. And before I go any further, I do want to back up just a bit.
Okay.
I talk about my family again.
Yes.
I'm very lucky man. My son is a full colonel in the Air Force. He's a graduate of the air traffic control. He's a graduate of the Academy, Air
Okay.
Force Academy.
Mhm.
His lovely wife, Teresa,
Mhm.
is also a graduate, and she pulled her time and got out as a captain, went and got her doctorate. I don't know exactly what it is, but she's a rocket scientist, literally. That's just two. Now, to, well, I was fortunate enough to be able to give my son his first salute.
Mm. That's very special.
I got my silver dollar from him. I kept that silver dollar, and I told him, when your firstborn becomes 16, he or she will get that coin. It just so happens that his firstborn, her name is Shannon, excuse me, her name's Shannon. Last June, she graduated and was commissioned at the Air Force Academy.
How wonderful.
I had that same coin. She gave me that same coin, and I gave her her first salute. I still have the coin, and when Shannon has children, her firstborn at 16 will get that coin. And it's kind of a tradition that we have in our family now.
Yes.
And
Good.
I'm very proud. My grandson served in the Navy for 5 years
Oh,
on the USS Nimitz.
wow.
And like I said, I come from a military family, but I did want to put that back in because that's very important. I love my family, and they're all military, most of them. So
Congratulations.
where I was in Swedish Hall, went back to
And you came back to
we're
be
back
an
in Fort
instructor.
Rucker, and I was an instructor, and I was passed out the air traffic control school,
Mhm.
and then I came down on orders for Korea.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'd never been to the Far East.
Mhm.
Um, I was kind of looking forward to it, and then one day I got a phone call. Now I had a fellow instructor who had gone from Fort Rucker to Fort Huachuca, which was air traffic control actual, headquarters, and he was a bigwig in Fort Huachuca, and he called because he had also been stationed in Vicenza, Italy, and we got to talking about that many times, and I kept lamenting because there were no air traffic controllers in Vicenza, Italy. I always wanted to get back to Vicenza. So one day, out of the blue, on a Saturday morning, I'll never forget, it was a Saturday morning about 10 o'clock, I got a phone call.
Mhm.
And this fellow named Anderson.
Mhm.
Said, Williams, how would you like to go back to Italy? I said, well, I would love to, Andy, but here's the thing. Two, they don't have air traffic controllers there, and I'm on orders for Korea. He said, Chris, don't sweat the small stuff. Got you covered. So what happened is, all air traffic control prior to this time in Italy was handled by Italian Air Force NCO air traffic controllers.
Okay.
Literally, every airfield in Italy was handled by Italian air traffic controllers,
Okay.
NCOs. from the Air Force. Well, they decided that they wanted to become a union. Well, their government said, yeah, you go ahead and make a union, but you can't be a union and be in the military. So you have a choice. You can make a union, or you can get out of the military and get a union, or stay in the military and not be a union. Well, 85 to 90% of the controllers chose to get out, and so they resigned. They were NCOs, and they all resigned from the Air Force. Well, then that's when the Italian government threw a clinker into their little machine. He said, you're all out, and now you got your union, and you've got what you wanted, but here's the thing. We will not have civilian air traffic controllers at any military airport in Italy. Well, only the major cities in Italy have international airports, civilian one, Milano, Torino, Rome, Florence, Naples. I could go on, there's Venice. All the other airports in Italy are considered military airports and must be controlled by military personnel.
Sure.
The problem was they had a severe shortage of air traffic controllers, and they cranked their school up, and they were pushing these young officers through this as quickly as they could. But when they got out, they were really raw. What they needed at this particular airfield where I wanted to go back to was called Dalmolin Airfield. The commanding general at the Italian Air Force called the commanding general in Vicenza and said, hey, do you want to continue to use our airfield? Of course, the American general said, of course we do. He said, I need help. I need Italian-speaking American controllers. Well, it just so happened that as an E7 at the time, I was the ranking man, the ranking NCO who had an Italian identifier on his MOS that I could speak Italian and was an air traffic controller. I got selected to be the NCOIC of the American Controllers Detachment there. And the way I got that identifier, just on a whim one day, another friend of mine said, you know what, let's go into this building and take this test. It's a test you take to see how fluent you are in a particular language. I went in, and out of a scale of 1 to 10, I scored an 8.5 reading and speaking. Well, that qualified me, so that was tacked onto my MOS, my identifier. So that helped. And so, like I said earlier, I had a tendency to pick up languages, and the way I did that, again, I went out on the economy, I ate their food, I mixed with the locals. You know, I picked up the language. The first thing I learned to say was, what do you call that? How do you say this? What is this called? That's how I learned the language, and I would repeat it, and that's how I learned the language, which I do have a kind of a knack for.
You do.
But it worked. So where was I?
So you had come back, you were an instructor pilot here at Fort. No.
He's in Italy.
Oh, he's in Italy. You're back in Italy?
Oh yeah, I
That's
went
right.
back. I
You
went back to
Italy.
my job. My job was to work myself out of a job.
Okay.
Our job was to help train, polish off these Italian controllers. They were young kids, all Italian, of course, all second lieutenants.
Okay.
And we finally ended up doing our job. We finally got them to where they needed to be. And then I got sent up to Heidelberg, Germany, which is headquarters for all the forces in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, of course, in the Air Traffic Control Division. I became on the staff. I was responsible at that time for upgrades for different airfields. One cute story, and I will use Colonel Brown's name, it's just Colonel Brown. I had to take this paper to Colonel Brown, and I typed it up. It was all perfect, and we had done our study. We'd gone out to this airfield, and we needed to put in new windows and blah, blah, blah. It was going to cost $10 million. Well, I typed up the paperwork and took it to Colonel Brown. Now, Colonel Brown was the kind of guy that he trusted his NCOs. He said, Willie, is it okay? I said, yes, sir, but let me check it one more time. So I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness, I made a mistake. Instead of $10 million, I was going to let him charge $100 million. I said, sir, I've made a mistake. I have too many zeros. He said, well, go fix it. So I fixed it. So I came back and I said, sir, I'm terribly sorry. I made a mistake. He said, Sergeant Williams, let me tell you something. I said, yes, sir. He said, if you ain't making mistakes, you ain't doing nothing. And I said, well, thank you, sir. He said, don't do it again. So I did. I never made a mistake with that man again. But that's just one of the things that I've learned throughout my military career. Measure twice, cut once.
Right.
So that's my last 9 months.
Mhm.
My last 9 months in the Army, I was assigned to a company in Worms, Germany, as their first sergeant. I am here to tell you that was one of the best assignments I had. I absolutely loved it. I got to finally use all of my leadership skills, not only for the troops.
Mhm.
I always like to joke and say my job was to manage the troops and keep the commander out of jail,
Mhm.
which most and now all first sergeants do. Trust me. And as long as we're talking about sergeants and officers, my son was young. He said, Dad, I'd like to serve. And I said, I'm proud. I said, but I got some advice for you. He said, what's that, Dad? I said, number one, try the Air Force, the Navy, or the Army. It doesn't make a difference to me. It doesn't matter whatsoever to me what you go into. But I would like to see you go as an officer. NCOs are important, but officers are just as important. And I said, but while you're an officer, the biggest thing I want to ever teach you is treat your NCOs with respect. They will make you or they will break you. You know, my son, the colonel, has done that. And I have seen letters that he's received from NCOs that said, sir, I would take a bullet for you. And now, if that doesn't make a man
That's a
proud,
success.
I don't know what does. That's why my wife won't let me wear button-down shirts, because I keep popping the buttons on. I'm so proud. I am very proud of my entire
Well,
family. So
how long did you serve total?
I served a total of 22 years, 6 months, and 3 days.
Wonderful.
14 hours and 13 minutes, but I'm not counting.
And you only wanted, and you chose the Army because you only wanted to serve 3.
Yeah, that was kind of strange. I only wanted to go in for 3 years.
22 years later.
22 years. Yeah, I served. But you know what? It was my fault. I found my following. I mean, I found what I needed to do. I went in the U.S. Army as a brash know-it-all.
Mhm.
I had the world by the tiger by the tail. Nobody could tell me nothing. I was the smartest thing, And they definitely taught me, no, you're not. But when I ended up, when I graduated, when I retired, I really felt I had accomplished something.
Good.
I would do it all over again tomorrow if I could. I have no regrets. Yeah, during when I served, it was like this. I mean, everybody has every job. You got good days, you got bad days. But I honestly feel that the good days definitely outnumbered the bad days.
I want to say, just from observation and listening to you, it's probably due to your good attitude, because you tended to have a really good attitude throughout.
Well, attitude does have a big thing. I mean, I have seen young people come in and they hate the military. They don't want to be there for some reason or another. They used to have the old thing, go in the military or go to jail.
Mm.
I don't know that they have that now or not. I don't think that's a good idea.
Mm.
But they did that when I was younger. But I have seen a lot of people change.
Mhm.
I've seen them come in brash, cool, and I was one of them. and when I first found out that I could be a leader when I was in basic training, I turned 20. I was drafted, or correction, entered the military at the age of 20 years. So I automatically went in. I was already called grandpa. Because all these other kids are like 17, 18 years old. And I'm 20 years old already. I turned 21 running the infiltration course. The infiltration course is a field about like a football field.
Mhm.
And I knew we were in trouble because during the daylight hours, we went out. This is at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. We went out. We told take our pots, our steel pots, and go on this area and pick up any rock that was bigger than a softball. It's a big softball. That's a big rock. We had no idea what was coming at the time. At nighttime, we all got formed up. So now we're going to go run the infiltration course. Well, you go on one end of this field, and you have to go to the other end. But you have to do it on your belly, and there's barbed wire that's about 2.5 to 3 feet above you, and you have to crawl through all these rocks on your belly. But here's the kicker: they're firing live ammunition over your head.
Oh,
Yes, they are. It's live machine guns. And they told us ahead of time, do not stand up because this is live fire. One kid didn't believe it. No, he did not stand up. He did not stop. He's not that stupid. But what he did do is he held his rifle up, and he got torn up to shreds. He said, oh my God, they are shooting real bullets. The kid ended up buying his own rifle, by the way. He had to pay for his rifle because we were told not to do that.
correct.
That was the old M1.
Mm.
It was wooden stock, heavy,
Mhm.
9.5, 10-pound rifle. Anyway, we got through this, and again, like I told you, I was a platoon leader. We counted noses, and I was short one. Oh, no. Well, I had no choice. I had to run all the way around, get back on that line, and go back and forth until I found the missing person. Now, it's ironic because this guy who was missing was the biggest guy in the unit. He was a huge fellow, and he was also the bully. Everybody had to cow down to him because he was the big guy. He was caught under this barbed wire because he was so big. Well, we got him out. We dug him out. We finally got him up. And it's so ironic because that young man did a 180-degree turn. He was no longer the bully. He was the biggest team player you ever wanted to see in your life. And I got through it then. I was laying in bed and thinking, I turned that kid. That really made me feel good, like I actually had done something. And I said, I like that feeling.
You bet.
That makes me feel good.
You bet.
That's when I decided that if I'm going to be in this man's army, I'm going to lead as much as I can. I don't want to follow. I want to lead. And it worked out for me throughout my career. Now, I was never an officer, but I think I was pretty darn good NCO.
Sounds like it.
I mean, I knew my place inside. As a first sergeant, I'd walk in and say, John, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. Yes, yeah, okay. Because they were young. They were young lieutenants, young captains. They didn't know. And my job was to keep them out of jail. Simple as that. But outside, yes, sir, yes, sir. I mean, boy, you don't disrespect my captain at all. He's mine. I can go back in the back room and yell at him all I want. You can't. I knew my place in life, and I stuck to it.
Now, where did you retire out of?
I retired out of Heidelberg, Germany.
Oh, okay.
I had purchased a home or built a home in Vicenza, Italy. I stayed in Italy. I liked it there.
Mhm.
I spent a total of 17 years in Italy before my son graduated from the Air Force Academy. That's when I came back to the States to stay. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I worked after the military. I worked for the government, of course. I became a GS5 at first, and I ran outdoor recreation.
Mhm.
I had swimming pools and golf courses, and I had all kinds of things that I was responsible for.
Mhm.
I've never shirked responsibility. I like responsibility. And then there was an opening at the marketing office. In the meantime, I had got into computers really big,
Mhm.
and I became a graphic artist, pretty much self-taught.
Okay.
So I got a job in the marketing office as a graphic artist. You know, when the boss left, they asked me if I wanted the job. It was a promotion. I was a GS9 by then. It was a promotion to GS11. I said, nope,
Wow.
no, I couldn't do it. He said, "Well, why not?" Because I'm not a yes man. And I didn't always agree with the way things were run, but I didn't fight it, but I just couldn't do it. So I always stayed where I was. And then I retired from there and I came back to the States. And that's when my son got married, graduated and got married. And so to this day, I'm very proud of my family. Um,
Is there anything else as we're kind of closing down that you would want to share with people that watch this in the future?
yes, for those young ones who are watching this, if you get the chance, try the military. You don't have to stay, you don't have to be a lifer, you don't have to, just try it. It will make you it will grow you up very quickly. It will teach you a lot. Um, and you're the only one who can benefit from it. Again, like you told me earlier, is attitude. If you go in with an attitude that you can learn something from this or gain from this, then you have no problems at all. If you go in with the attitude, I have to be here, I don't want to be here, you have a problem. But yes, go in with eyes wide open, looking to learn. And it's one of the best opportunities you'll ever have in your life. I guess I'm selling the Army, huh? Right. I don't care if it's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. It doesn't matter. They're all brothers.
Mhm.
So, yes, ma'am. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Thank you so much for your service to our nation.
Thank you very much for asking me.